Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a huge question from American history. What does it take to win a voice when the law itself is designed to keep you silent? We're diving deep into the long, tough, and absolutely critical fight for women's right to vote.
So, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start in a world where half the country was legally voiceless. Then, we'll look at the growing demand for suffrage, unpack the decades of struggle that came next, celebrate the historic victory in 1920, and finally, explore why that victory was really just the beginning of a much bigger fight.
This question right here, what happens when you're legally denied a voice? This wasn't some abstract idea during the Progressive Era. For millions of American women living through this time of massive change, it was their everyday reality. Okay, let's set the stage. At the turn of the 20th century, this idea of progress was everywhere. But let me tell you, it wasn't for everyone. Women were systematically, legally shut out of the political process and had very few rights to speak of.
Just think about that for a second. In the eyes of the law, women weren't really considered full citizens. They couldn't vote, they had very little control over their own money or property, and most professions were completely closed off to them. The government was making laws that controlled every part of their lives, and they had absolutely no say in it.
Now, what's so powerful about this quote from Susan B. Anthony is how she frames the problem. She's not just saying, hey, this is unfair. No, she's saying it's a total betrayal of what America is supposed to stand for. An oligarchy of sex? That means a government run by men for men, which is the exact opposite of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So, this massive injustice sparked a clear, powerful demand: suffrage, the right to vote. This one goal became the heart of a growing movement of women who simply refused to be silent any longer. And get this quote comes from a speech Anthony gave right after she was arrested for voting illegally in the 1872 election. Her argument was just brilliant in its simplicity. She pointed right to the Constitution's preamble. It says, "We the people." It doesn't say "we the men." The right was already there, she argued. It was just being illegally denied to half the population. And that is the mic drop moment. Anthony boiled the entire complicated debate down to this one simple, impossible to argue with question. Because if women are persons, which of course they are, then they are citizens and they are entitled to all the rights of a citizen. It was a challenge the other side just couldn't answer. But, having a brilliant argument and actually winning the fight are two totally different things. Making this a reality took decades of protest and struggle. And even within the movement, people had different ideas about the best way to win. The movement kind of split into two main camps. You had the National American Woman Suffrage Association, or NASA, which took a slow and steady, state-by-state approach. And then you had the more radical National Woman's Party, the NWP, led by the incredible Alice Paul. They wanted a federal amendment, and they were willing to be confrontational to get it. And their tactics were nothing short of heroic. They organized massive marches, they lectured, they wrote. Alice Paul and the NWP even became the first people to ever picket the White House. And for that, they were arrested, thrown in jail, and treated horribly. When they started hunger strikes to protest, they were painfully and brutally force-fed by their jailers. So let's be really clear here, this was not some polite debate. The women fighting for the vote faced fierce, organized, and sometimes really violent resistance at every single turn. And the opposition, they were highly organized. This letter you see here is a perfect example. Their main argument was basically about states' rights. They said suffrage was an issue for each state to decide on its own, and that a federal amendment would trample on the will of the people in states that had already voted no. They also used the Constitution as a weapon. This letter argues that the president had no business getting involved, that it was a matter for Congress and Congress alone. It just goes to show you this was a battle being fought on all fronts, in the streets, in the newspapers, and with these really complex legal arguments. But then we get to the turning point. By 1916, pretty much all the major suffrage groups were united behind one goal: a constitutional amendment. Then a few big dominoes started to fall. New York gave women the vote in 1917, and then President Woodrow Wilson finally switched his position and came out in support. The political tide was finally turning. I mean, just look at this timeline. The amendment was first introduced way back in 1878. It took over 40 years just to get through Congress. After it passed in 1919, The final fight was getting the states to ratify it, and it all came down to a nail-biter in Tennessee. The fate of millions of women was decided by a single, dramatic vote. And this is what it was all for. Just 28 words. So simple, so clear, and so powerful. After generations of struggle, this idea was finally the law of the land, completely remaking American democracy. August 26th, 1920. Remember that date? The day the ratification was made official. It was the single largest expansion of voting rights in American history. It changed the country forever. But as we're about to see, this was not the end of the story. But, and this is a huge but, the story doesn't stop in 1920. Because winning a right on paper and making sure every single woman could actually use that right, well, those turned out to be two very different things. And this is where the story gets so relevant for us today. The 19th Amendment was a monumental victory, but it was an incomplete one. It didn't get rid of all the discriminatory state laws, like poll taxes and literacy tests, that were specifically designed to keep certain people from voting. For African American women, especially in the South, and for other women of color, the fight for a real voice at the ballot box was far from over. It would continue for decades. The story of the 19th Amendment shows us that change is possible, but it is never, ever easy, and it's rarely a clean finish. It leaves us with this big, critical question that we are still dealing with today. When a right is guaranteed by law, what does it take to make that promise a reality for every single citizen? The work of democracy is never truly done.